Hi, Blastpop here. Today I'm looking at Victory Games, the Korean War, June 1950 to May 1951. This was a game first published in 1986 and was designed by Joe Balkowski. One of the interesting things you'll immediately see when we look at this game further is that everything about it is so carefully considered, thought out, and in many cases is the model of not only the way rules should be written in terms of clarity, the cleanliness in which the game is presented. There's just, it's spare in its use of words, but every word has a meaning. It is truly an incredible package. I had just acquired this particular copy of this game after having lost a copy several years ago of the original. I'm very happy to have it back in my collection. And this copy has some counters that came punched out, very few, and essentially otherwise it's a pristine and mint copy except for about 40 counters that have been punched out previously by its previous owner. It's in wonderful shape and condition, and especially considering the age of from 1986. A classic cover here with MacArthur on the cover, presumably somewhere near Incheon for the Incheon landings. Comes in a 2-inch box, typical for the period of 1986 from the Victory Game Company, and has high solitaire suitability, which is wonderful. Shows you a picture of the overall map being predominant. Has 5 introductory scenarios and then an advanced game. The 5 introductory scenarios teach you the elements that you will need to put into play for the campaign. Also shown are some samples of the kind of counters you might expect to see within the game itself. Proceeding further, here's a copy of the rules. Again, considering the age, it's in wonderful shape, and it weighs in at 52 pages. Now, don't let that be an impediment to playing the game, because there are several pages of not only examples, but also history and such. It's interesting, there's no movement values on the counters. You have your attack value, you have your anti-tank value, and your defense value. And the backside is your fatigue side when you do too much. It shows the map, how it's set up if you put both of them together. And so it quickly moves in to the units, terrain. You got your sequence of play, which is interesting because they actually have a sequence of play where every phase for every turn of the 12 turns of the campaign game tells you every phase you can expect that turn, including any differences for that particular turn. Yeah, supply is very important in this game, very much so, and it impacts how units move, depots move, are used, I should say. And so you have an operations phase, and it continues indefinitely until somebody passes. Now, during your turn, you can do an inactivation, you can do an amalgamation, reorganization, amphibious assault, amphibious evacuation, parachute drop, and Chinese or Soviet placement and activation. And that's in the advanced game. So essentially, if you do an activation, you can use action points to move units tactically, operationally, or strategic. Now, you use those points, and essentially, a unit in tactical move has 4 movement points, operational has 8 movement points, and strategic, you get to move the unit 12 movement points. And then you perform your movement actions, And then you have then you can do attack actions, and depending on an action point cost, how much value that unit will be modified for its die roll modifier to improve your odds. You have assets, which are tanks and such. Combat, fairly simple. Modifiers include close air support, armor, assets, naval support for the UN only, river, hexsides, and intensive all-out attacks. Nothing complex here in the least from an experienced wargamer's point of view. And you have your combat results, your retreat, reorganization and amalgamation, an extensive example here of combat and fatigue, breakdown, UN amphibious operations, i.e. Incheon, parachute units optional, reinforcements, reconstitution, and enhancement, air missions, control of cities, special rules. And essentially, that's the rules you need to learn the game. Now, that's 26 pages in big print, including the cover and numerous examples and other illustrations. Then you have your combat charts, armor table for armor combat, depot tables, and then your reinforcement chart. Additionally, both players receive a game turn record, which lists, as I alluded to earlier, every turn and every phase in each turn, and denoting in a bolder font changes that you would expect that are different for that turn as opposed to a standard situation or turn. Likewise, you have the same for the north. More charts, terrain cost charts. So that constitutes part of the rules book. So the number of pages isn't as great as would first appear, as I indicated. Scenario 1 is an introductory scenario, the invasion of the South from the north, and is a basic combat situation where essentially you're driving from the north to try to capture all the ports, such as Pusan and Daegu, among others. Second scenario is the United Nations Strikes Back. All these introductory scenarios are one mappers. And this is essentially where they invade at Incheon. You have a Chinese intervention scenario where all hell breaks loose when MacArthur wasn't expecting Chinese intervention. Should be an interesting scenario. The United States resurgent. And then finally, defeat into victory. So you got 5 basic scenarios. Now the advanced game, which is used for the campaign game, which uses both maps, is actually an unbelievably brief in terms of the rules amount. Essentially, it's just a few pages of rules, about 4 or 5 pages. So you have the big thing is UN commitment, and then likewise, essentially what the commitment of Chinese, Communist, and Soviet forces. You even have atomic warfare in this game. The Chinese nationalists and UN victory points. And so all that's done for the advanced rules and everything in under 40 pages. You have an extensive historical perspective by the designer, Belkowski. And then the game is history, which was something that Victory Games did some of and hasn't been done too much recently. And it goes turn by turn what happens in the game, and some pictures of some of the on-map situations for some of the situations as they looked historically. And at Pusan, you can see the situation that they were in that was precarious for the UN forces. More precarious situations with the Yalu offensive, and then coming back to stabilize the situation after the Chinese did intervene. And then it goes on to notes about the war, little interesting snippets. Culture, interesting. Some order of battle, and finally design credits. Additionally, we have a UN player aid card, close air support, interdiction, and an allocation table for the various parts of Korea. One-sided. 2 sheets of counters, brown core, crisply done and nice. As you see, some of the counters have been removed from the counter sheet. Reasonably thick, small 1/2 inch, and the white lines denote the fatigue. Is a quick way to pick up on which units are fatigued versus not fatigued. You have Americans, South Koreans, National Chinese, Commonwealth markers. Here you have the North Koreans, Soviets, Chinese, again more markers. Fatigue side of the counter sheet. Comes with a counter tray and the pieces that were previously removed. Combat system uses a D10, which was included. And then finally, we'll take a look at the map here. Both maps are set up. And please pause this if you see something you want to look at a little more closely. You will note that an awful lot of charts and tables have been included on the map, not only for the player's convenience, but I think it's a nice design choice to have that information at the player's fingertips. It uses up a lot of otherwise empty space. See all the charts. Invasion zones. Map is very, very nicely done. It's of an older style. But very neat and clean. I absolutely love this game. The artwork and the classic feel that it evokes. This has been Korea by Victory Games. Please comment, like, and subscribe. This has been Blastpop. Bye.